Thank you so much for this lovely introduction. It was way more than I ever hoped for. Thank you very much. Very generous. Thank you very much to KOTESOL as well for inviting me. It's a real honor to be here. I have to apologize. I've got a terrible cold, but I don't feel as bad as I sound, so just bear with me. Hopefully you can still hear me and understand me. And the last thank you goes to the wonderful Warwick students who are all here. And it's really lovely. It's very moving for me to have you here. And it's a really great advertisement, I think, for Warwick. And I'm really, really pleased that you made the journey, especially some of you I know came from Japan. I have taught a lot of Korean students in the past, and this is only my second time in Korea. So I'm still learning lots of new things about this wonderful country. So thank you very much for having me here. Now this talk this afternoon is about a very recent passion of mine. I've been talking and writing about this quite a bit in the past couple of years, and it is very hard for me to condense everything about this in just 45 minutes. But I'm going to try really hard. If nothing else, then hopefully maybe hand you over the passion as well. I know some of you are here because you have children and you're interested in this topic. Some of you might be teaching and working with children, and some of you might be training teachers who are working with children. So there's so many different reasons why you might take an interest in this. I took an interest in this because in my writing experience, I noticed that this is certainly a road less traveled. We don't have many publications out there in ESL and EFL when children are more actively involved in any kind of research process. So this is sort of the title of my talk, A Road Less Traveled, Children as Co-Investigators in Classrooms. Now, I also know that at teachers' conferences, people very quickly fall asleep if you bombard them with lots of research. So I'm not going to bombard you with lots of abstract theoretical stuff, because I know that makes people sleepy and tired. So I also try to do something that is practical enough. So I'm going to end with a slide which actually says, what can you do in your classroom tomorrow? If you're interested in something hands-on to explore in relation to this. So with that introduction, I'm going to, I don't know how to, just, yeah. Okay, so I'm talking about classroom research and classroom investigation, and having listened to so many wonderful talks already, Professor Dick Allwright, for example, obviously talked about the relationship between theory and practice, but many others. I've just come from Professor Crooks's talk, where theory and practice again was revisited. And this is the theme of the conference, working upwards, working up from practice towards theory. So even though this is not the real core of my talk, hopefully, I think even in this sense, my talk will hopefully bring something, because I do want to emphasize that what I'm talking about today is not really bringing down the academic research into the classroom, but doing research in classrooms, hopefully by teachers. In reality, it's not just teachers who do research in classrooms. In reality, it could be research students or outsider researchers. But I'm very much including in classroom investigation and research in general the intention for teachers to explore their own classrooms. Now, whether they explore it more formally, longitudinally, as part of a formal degree maybe, or much more like exploratory practice, all that is included in what I'm talking about today. I'm not making a big distinction, putting emphasis on one or the other. So exploratory practice, action research, or any kind of other type of research that anyone might do is included in all this. Now the last question on this slide about who does the research I already hinted that I'm including everyone in this, but I'm taking a step even further. I'm trying to suggest today that the children themselves should be included in this. Now, this is just a joke about research. What is research? It's very hard to define what it is, but again, I think it is true to say that if you ask questions and investigate your own practice, you might be doing some sort of research, some sort of small-scale research. Like these two people weren't aware they were doing research when they actually were doing it. A lot of teachers, just simply by asking questions, trying something out on a very small scale, in my sort of conceptualization, might be doing research. Now, research is very good for us, whether it's small scale or large scale. I've been trying to run more recently different races, trying to get fit and do something good for charities. And it occurred to me that research is a little bit like running, because it's very hard to start. Sometimes you think, well, can I do it? Am I able to do it? It's going to take a lot of time. I'm a bit unsure and unfit. Can I embark on this? But when you start, you realize it's good for you. It makes you feel better, fitter, healthier, and it will make you stronger. And I think it's true for teachers doing a bit of research or investigation. It will certainly make you happier, fitter, stronger. And it will empower you. Just like finishing the race, getting the medal, you feel empowered, you feel you've achieved something. And I think it's the same with research as well. Teachers who have done a bit of investigation and go along to conferences feel much better about themselves as professionals. And there's another thing as well. It's easier if you do it with others. It's always harder on your own, but it's easier to do it with others. It's the same for running. If you go out 5 o'clock in the morning on your own, not easy. But if by not going out you're disappointing a friend who's standing at the corner of your street, it's easier because you know you'll have someone to share it with. Now, when I looked at the research that exists in ESL and EFL about young learners, I came to the conclusion that basically there were two types of research. I started out by looking for research that gets published, of course, in mainstream books and journals. I know a lot of research, small-scale investigation doesn't get published necessarily. I'm aware of that, so obviously in my search that stuff wasn't necessarily included. I also know that I have linguistic limitations. Obviously I can't read research in Spanish or French or German, unfortunately. So whatever gets published in those languages I don't have access to. But if we look at the mainstream English-speaking journals, it's true to say that there's two kinds of research out there. When children are portrayed as objects, and this is about 90% of the research, I would say. So the children are passive, they're unknowing objects, they have absolutely no awareness about what goes on and why the research is done. And often, maybe their consent is not sought at all, because large numbers of children are given tests or tasks or some kind of intervention, and it's not really focused on the individual, so therefore no need to ask every single person. So this kind of research produces statistical results, large-scale data analysis, and evidently it's completely controlled by adults' interests and adult authority throughout the whole research process. Now, of course, this sort of research is being done with, not just with children, but with adults as well. And you could argue that for some topics and for some interests, this is perfectly appropriate. And I'm not arguing that this is not appropriate at all. I'm just arguing that this is the majority of the research that is out there about children. And then there's a small amount of research where children are subjects. So these are the case studies of learners. A lot of these have been done in Canada, for example, or in the United States, where they look at individual children, a small group of children, how do they do, how do they progress, how do they develop literacy, how do they negotiate their identity, things like that. So it's very much about individual children, and their unique characteristics are important, and they do come through in these studies. We get to understand the processes that they go through. But this research is also still described very much from an adult point of view. And I met Margaret Hawking at a conference, and her research was with small-scale qualitative data. And she was the one who said in an article somewhere that even though we tried everything, we traced the children, we talked to the parents, we visited the children at home, we followed them in the playground, we organized activities in the classroom and observed them, ultimately we were still describing everything from our adult researchers' point of view. I was really glad when I found that bit of quotation in her article, because it helped me a lot to move forward with this. Now, it's also just important to say that, of course, a lot of the studies that were done in the first category produced invaluable data about age differences, for example. Think of Piaget's work, for example. Everyone heard about Piaget, that's why I'm mentioning the name. What they achieved was they told us what a 5-year-old is like, a 7-year-old is like, a 10-year-old is like, and so therefore curricula in schools could be adjusted to the age-related needs. So the criticism of the second type of research is that all the age-related information we've got comes from this tradition, and so when we prepare research tasks, when we prepare research procedures, what we're doing is really, from a very adult point of view, we're deciding ourselves what's good and appropriate for a 5-year-old and what's good and appropriate for a 7-year-old. I'm sure you've all heard people look at stuff and say, yeah, this is a nice interview or a nice questionnaire, but this is not appropriate, I think, for a 7-year-old. A 7-year-old, I don't think, would understand this, this, and this. So these adult judgments are all coming from research that really originates in the first category. Now, children as co-researchers and active participants in research is a very revolutionary idea compared to the other two. And of course, it's not my idea, unfortunately. But I came across this idea when I was reading around the topic, and I discovered that in anthropology and general education, this kind of literature already exists. There's some very interesting and inspirational studies out there, where children, and especially older children, young people, were very active researchers and participants alongside adults, or in some cases without adults, doing research by themselves. But in ESL and EFL, I think there's a gap. I really didn't find very many studies, certainly not published studies in mainstream literature. And even though this, I think, is a great opportunity for us to open up a new territory, I wouldn't like to suggest that this is entirely without problems. There are loads of methodological and ethical challenges, but I don't want to start with those. I want to start with the benefits, and then I'll address the challenges in the second half. First and foremost, I think the change requires a perspective change, so moving perspectives. And it's not going to be possible for us entirely to drop the responsibility and totally give over to children, but it requires a perspective change from the adult researcher's point of view. So the first thing you need to do as a researcher is ask yourself, what's your understanding of childhood? Because your own understandings and your own convictions or your own thoughts will have directly or indirectly an effect on how you're going to deal with children. I mean, a lot of researchers don't want to go near children, never will. They don't like to work with children. Some people do, but maybe their understanding of children is that children need control. Children shouldn't be given too much responsibility. So maybe you're not interested in the kind of research then that would allow children to take more responsibility. So your own perspective and your own personal beliefs are really important because they will influence what you might or might not do. So it's not about how big this project is going to be or how much responsibility you give over, especially at the beginning when this is all new. It's about the intention of the perspective changing from object, subject to this co-researcher idea. Just to say a little bit more about why this is beneficial, what can we gain from this? So as I said before, there is an established literature out there. There are many studies in anthropology and sociology and general education where successful projects have been done with children as active participants. There was also in the late 80s a UN resolution about the rights of children, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. And among other things, the important thing that came out of that is that children have got the right to be actively involved in decisions that concern them. So this has been kind of taken up both in the literature from a theoretical point of view and in some research work from a practical point of view. Now the benefits of working with children in this way are manifold, but the most important probably is that the children will gain ownership and therefore will feel motivated to participate and will have fun. And this kind of engagement and ownership and motivation is not so alien at all. This is something that we all want in our classrooms, and it actually links really well to things like learning to learn. If you look at official curricula and policy guidelines for primary education worldwide, you will see that almost all governments will say, yes, we would like to do things like promote learning to learn and strategies for lifelong learning. Well, if you're going to take responsibility for your learning, it's kind of almost like a next step that you might also participate actively in any kind of investigation that's going on in your class. And there's also an argument that you learn transferable skills. If you're active and you learn something through a project, obviously in the next project you will be even more engaged and you can already transfer some important skills that you learned. Now, a lot of people might say, well, this is all very idealistic, it wouldn't work in my context, it's not possible, a lot of children might not be interested at all, and of course that's true. I'm not suggesting at all that this should kind of be universally applied. And there is also a very important process here. You can't just wake up one day and decide this is how I'm going to work with the children from tomorrow onwards. It starts with a small amount of maybe active participation in a particular project. And hopefully over time, when children have spent some time working in this way, they will perhaps take more and more responsibility for various aspects of the research process, and they may or may not get to the point where they will be fully fledged researchers themselves. At the Open University in the UK, if you look at the website, there's a whole department that is devoted to training children as researchers, and there's some very inspirational projects there where children actually explored areas of interest that were dear to them. And when Professor Dick Allwright talked about the project in South America, I was very interested to see how similar the topics were there that the learners decided to explore. Things like pregnancy and violence and bullying and improving schools and things like that. So it is something that a whole academic department in the OU has decided to promote and to work in this area, but I think it's important to emphasize still that obviously not everyone will go to that stage, the third stage. Now, I'd like to just give you a few bits of data and a few ideas that emerged from the work that I have done with some of my colleagues and some of my PhD students. These are just some picture images from the work that we have done. Some of these were in Iran. I've got an Iranian PhD student whose name, I'm going to acknowledge all my colleagues and students at the end, will come up towards the end of this presentation. But this just shows some of the activities that we have done with children. And I will come back to this and flash this out a little bit more. Now, in different projects, we have tried with my students and with my colleagues to do different things. And I think it's very interesting to see that if you work with children over time, minor involvement in a particular project might progress to growing levels of involvement. And how we started out at the beginning was simply we decided to give children a voice, and we explored their often unexplored perspectives by simply asking their ideas about kinds of things that they usually don't get to ask about. For example, talking about their favorite teachers and what good teaching is. It actually grew out of a project where one of my students was looking at what good teaching is according to teachers in Cameroon. And it occurred to us that perhaps we should ask the children as well. And then the children's section grew bigger and bigger and bigger, because once the children realized what the project was all about, that it was about the betterment of teachers and teaching in Cameroon, they got more and more inspired and told us more and more and more about what they thought good teaching was. And the interesting thing was that they didn't agree with the teachers. Teachers emphasize more technical things, that a good teacher is a good manager, keeps good time, has a lot of knowledge, uses communicative techniques. The children said, no, a good teacher has got a sense of humor, cares about us, knows our names, doesn't send us home when he's angry, and things like that. So the children very much emphasize effective and affective aspects, as well as obviously teacher also needs to have knowledge. Another little thing that we did in another project was asking children about research tools. So when we designed a questionnaire for 12-year-olds, we asked another group of 12-year-olds, several group of 12-year-olds, to give us insights into what they would recommend us to do in that questionnaire. And again, we were surprised to see just how many ideas they had. So they fed their own ideas into the questionnaire. And that was really nice, because when we used the questionnaire, we could say to those 12-year-olds, well, actually some other children helped us to design this. And again, it's amazing what difference that suddenly makes. It makes those children more motivated to fill in the questionnaire, as opposed to the one that was just simply designed by adults. Now, once we worked for a longer period of time with these children, it turned out that they were quite interested in what we were doing. They thought, yes, well, this is a research project, that's very good, but despite all the briefings and the initial discussions and the explanations about what we were doing, it seemed that their understanding of investigation and research grew and grew and grew, and that at the beginning actually they didn't really understand what was happening. So they began to reflect on things, and in fact they were almost like spontaneously asking for research training. And I'm going to show you some data in a minute to flash this out a little bit more. So they were sort of asking us about those aspects of the research that we never really imagined they would be interested in. Now, I must be honest, I must tell you that I've never worked with a group of children where we got to the full involvement, where you would have child participation in every stage of the process, from planning to research questions to data gathering to analysis. But I have read studies that did that. I think, it's important to say, just because it might not happen in all contexts, it is an interesting ideal to strive for. So in that sense, there could be a project along the line, maybe, if you've got an interesting context where children are very engaged, where all the planning, the conducting of the research and the evaluating of the project will be all child-led. But will they ever come to a conference like this and talk and write up an academic paper? No. So of course, again, you've got all these dilemmas, how far can you go? But I think just because you can't go all the way, it doesn't mean we can't push the boundaries a little bit. So now I'm going to just give you 3 very practical ideas for things that anyone can try. In the Cameroonian study, one of the things we asked the children to do was to design their perfect lesson with this perfect teacher. What would it look like? And so the children were very busy giving ideas. They worked in groups, they wrote up their ideas, they brought them together. And this is where we discovered that they're not really wanting interesting communicative activities or time management. They wanted things like jokes and games and an opportunity and a chance to laugh and a chance to learn something, but in a way that the teacher doesn't shout and doesn't tell us off and doesn't do any sort of negative stuff in the class. But this is just a little springboard for something that anyone can try. So you ask them to design something, their ideal lesson, then they can pool their ideas, then everyone can vote for the best lesson. And then you as a teacher, if you play ball, you could try and teach that perfect lesson, or even teach it with somebody whose idea it was, and see what happens. Another thing that another student of mine tried this was for her MA dissertation in India, was to work with children about a new unit in their textbook. The children had a fairly boring traditional textbook, I must say, with very little color and exciting stuff in it. So this student decided to do a bit of sort of research with them and asked them to bring along different textbooks from the library, and she brought along some as well, and then gave them disposable cameras, and they could take pictures from more exciting books, or indeed pictures from wherever they wanted to, and start designing a more interesting unit that they would like to learn from the textbook. And again, to her surprise, she didn't know how far the children will take this. To her surprise, there was abundance of ideas, lots of very calculated and intelligent activities and units got produced. And again, I guess, if you want to take this all the way, you can try and work with those units if your context allows you. And finally, a third very practical idea that anybody can try, it's called the diamond ranking activity. Again, I didn't invent this, it comes from Okane's work. It's O-K-A-N-E, if anyone's interested. It's a way of encouraging children to relax and have a discussion amongst themselves where there are no right and wrong answers. So the topic we used with, again, a student of mine was intercultural learning. What happens to you when you move to another country? What are you looking forward to? What are you worried about? What are the good things, bad things? So that was the topic, but it could be absolutely any topic. And the procedure is very simple. You give the children 10 statements, and then you ask them to arrange those in a diamond shape. So if I go back to my pictures, you will see that this one here is a diamond activity. So you've got the post-it notes, and you just arrange them from top to bottom. What's most important, most interesting, most concerning, and at the bottom, the least interesting, least important, least concerning. And because there's no right or wrong answer, the children get a chance to discuss and decide how they're going to arrange this. And they've got an opportunity also to compare their diamonds across the groups. And then if you can record all these discussions, what you begin to notice that interesting ideas and concerns are coming to the surface that perhaps wouldn't have come out, definitely wouldn't have come out, for example, in a one-to-one interview with just adult researcher and child. So this is something that is kind of nice, and it allows them to talk and share ideas and begin to bring together maybe what a small group thinks about a particular topic. And let me just show you a little bit of data. Like I said, I don't want to bore you with too much because they're hard to read and make sense of. But just to show you the kinds of things the children actually said. This was from the Cameroonian data when we were asking them about good teaching. And they were saying, one of the children said, when he was teaching, he was making that we should laugh. When he's saying something, he's doing the action. He makes that we should understand well. So there's a very sophisticated definition of a good teacher here, as you can see. But none of the adult participants of this study actually picked up on humor or the affective factors the same way. This second quote is showing, I guess, the fun element and how children really get engaged and forget about everything else if they really enjoy working on the project. Because people in criticism usually say to me, well, how can you tell they're not just saying things that they directly take out of their parents' mouth? You know, that's what they hear at home, so that's what they will say in these kind of when they work together. And that's true. Of course, you can never say that this is their own unique, original idea. There's no such thing. Everything we say and think comes from somewhere. However, there are those precious kind of raw moments when you can tell that somebody's being very spontaneous. You know, they sort of exclaim or they suddenly comment on something that seems irrelevant to us. But when we listen to them, we realize, oh, they made a connection with something. They bring in something that's very personal and spontaneous from their point of view. So we were doing one of the diamond ranking activities, and this child said, you know what I do? I don't ever want to leave this room because it's so cool. So, you know, when you ask a child after a project, again in a one-to-one interview, did you enjoy this? Of course they will say yes, you know. Why take the risk and say no, even if you didn't enjoy this? And compared to that, I call this sort of data much more genuine, much more spontaneous. We didn't ask them, they were working on the diamond, and suddenly somebody did say, you know what I do, I don't ever want to leave this room. So it's a nice thing to hear when they, you know, sort of spontaneously having fun, not having fun because you told them so. The last, this example is an interesting one, and it comes from the study that where we showed the children quite a lot of the analysis that the adult researcher did. And one of them said, I was just a bit surprised to see how many times, not like to change it, I was just a bit surprised to see how many times like lots of pauses and starting a sentence in the middle of the sentence and like this and like that. So basically they noticed that the transcribed data was transcribed verbatim. That, you know, if they didn't finish a sentence and pause and talk like, because a lot of not young kids, but teenagers, 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds, they sort of say like this and like that, and they talk in a way that's particularly messy. Any oral discourse can be very messy, but they suddenly noticed that the adult researcher transcribed it exactly as it was said. And then so they said, why is that? Why didn't you correct it? Why didn't you finish our sentence? It looks so embarrassing. So it again spontaneously led to a discussion about transcribing and what that is. And that is a part of the researcher's work. And the children were amazed and kept looking at, oh, I said that, this is my bit here, I said this, and look how it's been transcribed. And suddenly it wasn't embarrassing, suddenly it was a technical thing in research that they spontaneously took interest in. This is also spontaneous interest about research, and this is about representation. So someone said, when it came up towards the end, well, we didn't really expect this research project like this, and this person said, I thought it would be kind of part of that, like the big thing that was written, all about it. I thought it would be like tiny little, like one phrase we said, like in a huge big pile of papers. It is like one phrase that we said or something. Okay, it's hard to understand. That's what I'm talking about when I mean messy language. But basically this person is saying, no, we didn't expect that we will be all over your MA dissertation. We thought maybe one little thing we said. So this kind of shows that even though they were enthusiastic at the beginning, they agreed to be participants, they thought they understood what we were going to do, they did the diamond ranking activity. Actually, when you talk to them at the end, this person saying, I thought a tiny little word from us will be in that big book, and that's all. We didn't realize that our transcribed speech will be all over your thesis. We didn't realize that that's what research was like. So it's again about representation, isn't it? That I will be, as a research participant, represented in your dissertation in this way. A spontaneous question and an understanding that grew out of it. And finally, another child said, I didn't think it would turn out like how it was, like I didn't actually fully understand like what you were doing for the research, but now because you shared what your results came up with, and like just like whatever you did, I didn't expect it. So again, a spontaneous realization that at the beginning, yeah, we said we understood what was happening, but towards the end, we really understood it better. So I guess these last two extracts to me show that you need time for this. If you're doing a very short investigation in a classroom, whether you're insider or outsider, it's always better to follow it up at least a couple of meetings. Another thing we now tend to do is go back to the children always with the results, because they never expect that, because they kind of used to the tradition where the investigation or the research is done and then that's it. You don't need to worry about it anymore. No one's going to tell you what came out of it. It's not your business. And you know, if you just organize that one more follow-up meeting where you show them the results, you do nothing else, you already will gain some very interesting insights about what they think you achieved, what they think, you know, the outcome of the research is. So there are lots and lots of benefits. Like I said, the children get engaged, motivated, they're having fun. But there are also very important challenges, I think, which I need to talk about. The first one is rapport and relationship building is very important. And in the Cameroonian study that we did, the researcher was a well-known inspector in primary schools. And I think in that case, when he was doing his research, it was already announced in the school that the inspector was coming. So there was no way the researchers could play down his role and pretend to be, you know, unimportant. And so he had to do a lot of negotiation work with the children. And the children challenged him and challenged him. He said, I might be an inspector, but I'm writing a book about how to make better teachers in Cameroon. And I'm also a student at the University of Warwick. and you need to help me because I need to hear it from you what a good teacher is like. And some of the children were still not convinced. They kept saying, yeah, but how can you be a teacher, or how can you be writing a book if you're a student at Warwick University? So rather than ignoring these things, he spent a lot of time discussing, checking, double checking that they fully understood who he was and what he wanted. And this kind of work is extremely important, whatever you are, whether you're the teacher or the outsider, when you're doing this kind of joint work. So this sort of reflexivity, checking and double checking interpretations, this begins with asking the children whether they want to be participants. But of course, again, if you go into a class and say, who wants to be part of this project? Everyone go, me, 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 even though they don't know what it is. So initial yes doesn't mean anything. You need to keep checking, and you need to keep working on whether they still understand what it is they're doing, why, whether they're still willing and happy to be involved and collaborate. There are lots of ethical dilemmas, like some people would say, is it ethical to involve children in research in this way because it will take their time? How much extra time can they possibly devote? Is that ethical? There's also an issue about accessibility. In the UK, it's almost impossible to access children because you need a CRB check and then you need lots of other things before you can go near children. So there's a huge tension between wanting to give responsibility to children, but at the same time protecting them from everything. You know, don't go near a child, don't ever touch a child, don't ever, make gestures that could be misunderstood. And yet, carry on, work with children, make them into co-researchers. So there's a very, very big tension there. And I guess I have to finish on the idea that, of course, all research is representation. So even if children are involved from step one until the very end, of course it is still being interpreted from our adult perspectives. But again, I think this doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. We shouldn't try and get to a situation where we work with them, we give them these opportunities, and we give the opportunities to those who want to participate in this way. And of course, we carefully work with the challenges along the way. That's all we can do, and try and push the boundaries a little bit. So I said I would stop by giving just a few ideas to those who are interested in this. So if you've got a little project in your mind, it doesn't have to be a big one, and it doesn't have to be a formal PhD or master's level project. It can be absolutely any project. You could start tomorrow by discussing it with the children and plan for creative ways in which you would elicit their views about it. So for example, you can get them to look at some draft questions that you've got, or activities and tools that you've planned. You can let them help with the data collection. For example, it turns out that 10, 12-year-old children are very good at interviewing each other. And children will be much more excited in answering questions if the questions are being asked by other children. I've read a very inspirational study where Year 6 children were interviewing Year 5 children in a particular school, and it worked out really, really well. Of course, the teachers worked with the children about asking questions, and two kids worked together. One had the list of questions and one was taking notes. So a little bit of groundwork is needed before it takes off, but it's not impossible to do. Or you can just simply invite them to look at some data and see what they say. Our children in our project said some amazing things that we never imagined they would. My student didn't even want to bring along her master's book because she said, well, no one will want to look at that. Everyone wanted to look at that. No one was interested in her little short version full of pictures, child version of her master's dissertation. Everyone wanted to see what the real thing was. And once they saw it, they found themselves in it, and they didn't understand why they got pseudonyms. Said, I said that, why didn't you put my name? So it was a perfect opportunity to discuss with them about confidentiality and that kind of thing in research. So you can just invite people or children to look at data, or you can invite them to see what kind of conclusions they might draw when you're drawing your own conclusions. So there's no real recipe here. You can try and get them involved whichever way feels right in your context. I think there are lots of different ways, and if anyone would ever do work like this and you would like to share it with me, I'd be really grateful. So my timekeeper person there just said I've got just a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to stop here in case there might be some comments or questions. So first of all, thank you very much for listening. And like I said, acknowledgement is due to a number of people who've contributed to my own development and my own work in this area. And these are Samana Zandian, my PhD student who worked in Iran with a large group of children. Harry Kuchak, who's my colleague and student who's now working in Sheffield University. And I'm sure there are people in this room who might even know him. And also Richard Smith, my colleague at Warwick, who is working on a project with me in this particular area in India. And this is my email address, so if any of you are interested in more, lots of examples and literature and other things, I'm very happy to provide more. And equally, if you've got work going on that you think might interest me, I'd be also very grateful to hear from you. So thank you very much again. I'll stop here. And